Hello everyone and welcome to QualityOldHomm. Today it's time for another tier list, this time from Fortress unit roster in Heroes of Might and Magic 3 Horn of the Abyss expansion. And the tier list is based on single player setting, so campaigns, single scenarios. And furthermore, in the background is kind of acting the My How Good Is series, where the units are evaluated based on their fighting performance, and also the costs and requirements are taken into consideration in both of those How Good Is tests, as well as here in this tier list. But without further ado, let's begin with tier 1 creature, Gnolls. I think they're rather bad. In 1 versus 1 battle, I think they are rather in the average category, but they are really slow, so that's clearly a minus. It's a minus in the battlefield and it's a minus in the campaign map. So even though with Captain's Quarters you can get the growth to be rather decent, still, in my opinion, the unit is rather bad in quite many aspects. Of course, if it can land a hit with high enough numbers, it can do damage, but still it has difficulties to getting close enough for the enemy to land the hit. Especially so that the other parts of your army are still intact. So yeah, D tier from me. Then we have Gnoll Marauders. Well, the unit is improved a bit, and most importantly, the speed is raised by 1. So yeah, a bit better unit, but still, I don't know, perhaps weak C. It's a bit better than Gnolls, but not that much in my books. But then we have a bit better unit, namely Lizardmen. So overall ranged units are rather nice, especially in the early game, because then you can advance on the map without suffering casualties. And for that, Lizardmen are actually quite nice. The speed is still an issue. It's only 4 for the basic unit, 5 for the upgraded one, but the unit is quite sturdy and can actually pack a decent amount of punch. So because it's available quite early and it's rather good for tier 2 units, I will give it B tier. And the same applies to the upgraded variant, Lizard Warriors. Their speed, as I said, is 5 and the stats are a bit better. So for these, I think I will give them even low A tier. Of course, the unit performs really well in the early game. In mid-game, it begins to drop, and of course in the late game, tier 2 units are not that great, but I think these are still better than at least some. So I think that weak A tier is rather well justified for Lizard Warriors. Then let's move to tier 3 units. First we have Serpent Flies. What I like with this unit is that it's flying and it has rather nice speed. Its stats are not that great, but that ability to dispel buffs might be rather nice. And of course, it's available quite early and it comes with quite high numbers, so that's at least something. So I think I will give them B+. I think the unit is relatively useful in the early game, and of course, in my experience, there might be some of those fly hives or whatever the creature dwelling is called, where you can recruit these on the campaign map as well. So that's an additional bonus for the unit. So B tier for me. Then we have Dragonflies, actually the fastest unit in Fortress's roster. So that's rather important. In addition to dispelling positive buffs from the enemies, it casts weakness, which is rather nice, not that effective perhaps, but a nice addition. And, well, the unit is rather nice for kiting. You will need it in the late game to have any chance at all for speed superiority, though most factions do have faster units, so it's still a bit questionable, but still. And well, once again, it's not that good in battle, but kind of especially in support unit regarding speed, dispelling, and that weakness. I think the units can be quite beneficial, and of course the numbers are relatively great as well. So I think it deserves a place in solid A tier. Then let's move to tier 4, Basilisks. I mean, this might be a bit controversial, but I will give them D. And the reasoning is that the unit is relatively slow. It doesn't have too good fighting capabilities. Of course, it can turn enemies into stone with RNG, proper RNG. At the same time, if it manages to do that, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because that stoned unit will have bonus to defense, or was it suffers only 50% damage. So in some situations you might not be able to attack the other enemy units, and then that stoned unit or petrified unit still should have the retaliation. So if you attack petrified unit, you get the full retaliation and only inflict 50% of damage. So in bigger battles I get that the petrification can be rather nice. But as the unit is relatively slow, it can really be a double-edged sword in my books. So only D tier. Greater Basilisks are somewhat of an upgrade for that one. Perhaps that's a bit too low. Let's C, D, let's leave it to D. So it's a bit of buff for the unit. It gets a nice buff to speed, stats are buffed, and as the unit is a bit faster, perhaps that petrification can be useful as well. So I think I will give it solid B tier. It's not that great of a unit in my books, but still, I guess, decent enough. Then let's move to tier 5. First we have Gorgons. The building is relatively expensive to get, and these basic Gorgons, in my opinion, are not that great. And for this unit especially, they can do actually in battles, in most of the battles, at least something, but I think the main point is to try to conserve the numbers so you can get mighty Gorgons. And these I will give S tier. In my opinion, they are actually the best unit in Fortress roster. Even though the speed is not great, the building chain can feel a bit expensive, but still, the later the game progresses, the more valuable mighty Gorgons become. And that's mainly due to their special ability, deaths they do have. And the harder the enemy creature, or higher tier the enemy creature, the more valuable these mighty Gorgons become. So I would even dare to argue that Fortress doesn't stand a chance in late game unless they have mighty Gorgons to counter enemy tier 7 units especially, and perhaps even tier 6 units. So that's the basic reasoning, giving them S tier, as their value increases as the game progresses. Even in the early game, I think the unit is still solid B, perhaps even A tier, but in the mid game it already begins to go to S, and as in the late game, clearly strong S. So let's move to tier 6 then. First we have Wyverns. Based on battle performance alone, I would give them a C tier. Because, well, they do have flying, I'll grant that. Their speed is not horrible, but it's not even, well, it's not decent at the very least. And the stats are rather squishy. So yeah, you can access the unit really early, that's nice, but still the stats are rather bad. But because there are dragonfly hives in the scenario map quite often, that will actually improve the rating from C to B in my books. So a B tier unit here. And then we have the upgraded variant, Wyvern Monarchs, the second fastest unit in Fortress roster. It has the poisoning ability, which is rather heavily RNG, but still I think the speed makes the unit A tier. And on fighting capabilities alone, I think I would give it perhaps strong B or perhaps weak A, but I think those dragonfly hives, the reason that you can get wyverns from there for free and then you can upgrade them, kind of gives them a slight buff. So perhaps on the weaker side of A tier, but perhaps not quite on the weak side as the Lizard Warriors. So A tier for Wyvern Monarchs from me. Then let's move to Hydras, tier 7 unit. What I like about Hydras is that they attack all around them and the enemy cannot retaliate. What I don't like about them is that they are so slow and they practically lose one-on-one against every enemy tier 7 unit. So in pure 1 versus 1 they are just horrible, even with that no retaliation. So in order to get some value out of them, you need to kind of get them into middle of everything, which can be rather difficult because they have rather slow speed. But still, that no retaliation is no joke, and they do perform relatively well in battles, based on, well, already because they have rather high stats as they are tier 7 unit. So because of that, I think I will give them A tier. But when playing with them, one has to remember that let's put them on the weaker side, that they are not actually a counter to the heaviest units of enemies. They are kind of a crowd control unit. And for the enemy heavy hitters, you need to use Mighty Gorgons. However, the lack of stats these units have tends to leave a bit of a gap in the Fortress roster because they don't really have anything that shines too well there. So yeah, A tier perhaps a bit on the weaker side. Then we have Chaos Hydras. Well, the hit points are increased somewhat, the speed is increased a bit, still actually rather bad for tier 7 unit, but those increased stats do boost the unit quite a bit, and of course it's a bit more expensive and the dwelling is more expensive, but overall I think the trade-off is good for the unit, and thus it earns a place in S tier once again, not against other tier 7 units, but for crowd controlling the enemy. So yeah, this is my view, and of course one thing to remember here is that this is kind of internal tier list. If I made this tier list so that all units were kind of taken into consideration, I think at least some of the units would fall a bit downwards, especially Hydras and Chaos Hydras, perhaps even these two. So but inside kind of the Fortress unit roster, this is my view. So what do you think? Do you agree or disagree? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And thank you very much for watching. If you like the content, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Have a great rest of the day. QualityOldHomm out.